A millionaire sees his ex-girlfriend begging to feed triplet girls and changes her life forever. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comment section. Also, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next millionaire love story when it drops. Now let's begin. It was just another typical day for Andrew Smith. His sleek, black car hummed along the crowded streets of the city as he headed home after a high-stakes business meeting. His car came to a stop at a red light. The world around him seemed to slow down. Then it happened. His gaze shifted to the sidewalk and his heart skipped a beat. There, standing on the curb, was a face he hadn't seen in years. Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he once thought he would build a life with. But now her clothes were tattered, her once bright eyes filled with exhaustion. She was holding 3 small girls in her arms, triplets, huddled close to her, all looking up at the world with hunger and need. The image hit him like a punch to the gut. Andrew's mind raced. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief. As he sat there, stunned, Sarah glanced up. She didn't recognize him immediately. "Please, can I get $1?" Sarah's voice was soft but desperate, barely audible above the noise of the bustling street. Andrew's chest tightened. Without thinking, he rolled down his window. "Sarah?" Her head snapped up. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She seemed to doubt herself for a moment, but then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Andrew?" The name felt foreign coming from her lips, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. He stared at her. Her face, lined with years of hardship, was a stark contrast to the vibrant woman he once knew. But it wasn't just her. The 3 young girls, those innocent faces, looked like they've seen a lot of suffering to last them a lifetime. For a second, he just sat there, unable to speak. His mind swirled with confusion, anger, and disbelief. He couldn't find the words to say. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the reunion he had imagined all those years ago. "What's going on, Sarah?" Andrew finally managed to ask, his voice a mixture of frustration and concern. She looked down, and the weight of her situation hung in the air between them. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and he could see the pain. "I need help, Andrew. I don't know what else to do." The words barely registered as Andrew's gaze shifted to the children once more. They were all still and quiet, too quiet for children. Their clothes were ragged, their faces marked by hunger and uncertainty. Andrew's heart sank as he realized what was at stake. These were his children. 3 little girls he had no idea even existed until this very moment. Sarah, noticing the shift in his expression, tried to explain, her voice quivering. "They're mine. I've been trying to survive, to keep them safe." But he couldn't even hear her completely as his mind reeled. These were his children, his daughters. The realization hit him like a shockwave. Without thinking, Andrew opened the door and got out of the car. He was already making up his mind, even before he knew exactly how to act on it. He looked at Sarah, then at the triplets, and made his decision. "I'll take you to eat. Let's get something to eat." Sarah looked at him, hesitant, confused by the sudden generosity. But she saw something in his eyes, something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for them after all. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Andrew nodded firmly, despite the turmoil inside him. His cold exterior was cracking, and for the first time in a long time, something inside him stirred. Something more than just the need to throw money at a problem. "I'll take care of it, Sarah. You and the girls just get in." And with that, Sarah hesitantly nodded, gathering the children as they climbed into his car. Andrew could feel his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what was to come. But one thing was for certain, his life was about to change forever. The car engine hummed softly as Andrew drove through the city streets. The evening air outside was crisp, but the tension inside the car was thick. Sarah sat beside him, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the road ahead. She refused to make eye contact, her mind no doubt filled with memories, some of them, no doubt, painful. The triplets sat in the back seat, their small faces barely visible in the dim light. They were quiet, their eyes uncertain, their hunger evident. As the car moved through the busy streets, the silence between Andrew and Sarah grew heavier. He couldn't help but glance at the rearview mirror, his gaze falling on the triplets once again. Their expressions were a strange mix of confusion and vulnerability. They were just children, caught in the middle of a life they never asked for. Andrew's heart tightened. He had everything, or so he thought. Success, wealth, a career that could make anyone envious. But here, with Sarah sitting next to him and the triplets in the back, He felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. There was something missing, something he couldn't buy with all his money. The silence stretched on, each passing moment thickening the air between them. It wasn't until Sarah spoke that the quiet was broken. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she was speaking to herself more than to him. Andrew's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His jaw clenched. "I didn't think I'd see you either," he replied, his voice carrying a mix of disbelief and uncertainty. There was a long pause before Sarah continued, her voice softer this time. "I never wanted it to end this way. But life, it just kept pulling us apart." Andrew kept his eyes on the road, his mind racing as the memories flooded in. It had all seemed so perfect once. He remembered their plans, the life they dreamed of building together. They talked about their future, about children, about growing old together. But somewhere along the way, Andrew had gotten lost. His career had taken over, and Sarah, she had been left behind. "I couldn't keep up," he murmured, almost to himself. His voice barely broke the silence between them. Sarah turned her head to look at him, her eyes sharp with the pain of years past. "You never kept up with me either, Andrew," she said, her voice now tinged with bitterness. "I needed you, but you were always chasing something else." The words stung. They weren't easy to hear, but they weren't lies either. Andrew knew it. He had been so consumed with work that he neglected everything else, everything that truly mattered. The triplets shifted in the back seat, their quiet movements a stark contrast to the tension growing in the front of the car. Andrew felt the weight of Sarah's gaze on him, but he didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he focused on the road, trying to push away the guilt that was creeping in. "I was stupid," he said, his voice low, filled with regret. "I was selfish." There was another long silence, broken only by the sound of the car's engine. The city outside felt distant, as if it existed in another world, another life. "After we broke up, things weren't easy," Sarah said, her voice quieter now, as if sharing the truth with herself more than with him. I tried to move on, but..." She trailed off, the weight of those years hanging between them. Andrew glanced at her quickly, his curiosity piqued. But Sarah wasn't looking at him. She was staring out the window, her eyes unfocused, lost in the past. "I found out that I was pregnant, Andrew," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what to do. I was alone." Andrew's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "It has been so difficult," Sarah went on, her voice trembling now. "I didn't know what to do. I was stuck, Andrew." It hit him like a ton of bricks. The triplets, his daughters. He hadn't known. He hadn't known he had children. He had no idea. He kept his eyes on the road, his chest tight, as Sarah spoke, the words washing over him like a wave he couldn't stop. "I didn't want them to grow up on the streets," she said, her voice softening with the weight of the memories. "But there was no choice. I couldn't give them anything else." Andrew clenched his jaw. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. How could they? How could he say anything when he'd been absent for all of this? "I couldn't let them suffer," Sarah continued. "I couldn't just let them grow up like I did, with nothing. But every day it got harder. And..." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I never thought I'd see you again, Andrew. I never thought I'd have to ask you for help." Andrew didn't know what to say. His heart was heavy with guilt. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, questions that didn't have answers. How could he have been so blind? How could he have missed all of this? "I'm here now," he finally said, his voice firm despite the whirlwind inside him. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. I'll help you. I'll help them." For the first time since they'd started this journey together, Sarah looked at him. Her eyes were filled with something Andrew hadn't seen in a long time: hope. It was small, just a glimmer, but it was enough. Andrew felt the weight of the moment. He knew that nothing would ever be the same again. His life was shifting, and whether he was ready for it or not, he was stepping into a new role. A role he wasn't sure he was prepared for. But he was going to try. Andrew's thoughts churned as the car moved through the quiet streets, the soft hum of the engine the only sound that filled the heavy silence. His mind couldn't settle. His thoughts raced, swirling with confusion, anger, and a deep, gnawing guilt that he couldn't shake. The triplets, his daughters, they were his family, and yet he had never known about them. He had lived his life, building his empire, pushing forward in his pursuit of success. But now, in the back seat of this car, his world had suddenly turned upside down. How could he have been so blind? How could he not have known? As the car sped down the road, Andrew's gaze remained fixed ahead, his hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. The weight of what he had just learned pressed down on him, like a 1,000-pound stone. He had a family. 3 beautiful girls, and he hadn't even known. It was overwhelming. All the years of focus on his career, all the late nights and endless meetings, all of it seemed so insignificant now. What had it all been for if he had missed this? What had he gained if the most important part of his life had been slipping away from him? Right in front of his eyes. As if sensing the depth of his thoughts, Sarah spoke again, her voice cutting through the fog in his mind. I tried, Andrew. I really did. Andrew's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He didn't know if she was speaking to him or to herself, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her. His mind was still too preoccupied, still too rattled by the revelation of the triplets. I know you did, he said quietly, his voice laced with emotion. But I wasn't there for you, Sarah. I wasn't there for them. Sarah's voice softened, and for a brief moment, Andrew thought he heard a flicker of understanding in her tone. She wasn't angry, not yet, anyway. I didn't want to burden you, Andrew. Not after everything that happened. After we broke up, I couldn't put that on you. I didn't want you to have to deal with the responsibility. I didn't want to trap you with it. Andrew's thoughts darkened. How could she think that? How could she think that he wouldn't have wanted to know? How could she have kept this from him? His daughters, his flesh and blood. He had a right to know about them. They were his responsibility too. But at the same time, Andrew understood. She had been alone. And when they had split, when their relationship ended, he had been so consumed by his own life, his career, that he never once looked back to see if she needed help, if she needed support. He never asked her what was really going on in her life, and now, here he was, sitting in a car with the consequences of his neglect staring him in the face. But I should have known, Sarah, Andrew finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have been there for you. For them. Sarah didn't reply immediately. She just sat there, looking out the window, the weight of their shared past hanging between them. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Andrew's mind wandered back to the past. Back to the time when he and Sarah had been inseparable. When they first met, it had felt like everything was falling into place. They had dreams, big dreams, and they spoke of them freely, dreams of a family, of a future. But the further Andrew advanced in his career, the more distant their dreams seemed to become. Sarah had always been there, supportive and loving, but Andrew had only seen her as a constant. He had never realized how much she needed him, until it was too late. He remembered their fights, the endless arguments about his work, about his refusal to compromise, about his inability to balance his career and their relationship. She had begged him to pay attention, to stop chasing success and start living. But he hadn't listened. He had just kept going, pushing forward, convinced that everything would work out on its own. And when Sarah left, when she walked away from him, he hadn't fought for her. He had just kept going, blind to the consequences. After you left, Sarah continued, breaking through his thoughts, I had to raise them on my own. I didn't have a choice. They needed me. And I didn't want to burden you, Andrew. I didn't want to bring you into this mess. But it got harder. Every day it got harder. And I couldn't do it alone anymore. Andrew's chest tightened. He had been so blind, so focused on himself, on his success, that he had missed the most important part of his life. Sarah's struggle, her pain, the life she had been living with the triplets, he had been completely unaware. How could he have been so detached, so focused on everything but her and their children? His mind raced again as the weight of the situation pressed on him. The triplets, his children, he could feel the guilt eating at him. He had been absent for so much of their lives. He didn't even know them. He didn't even know how to be a father. I'm sorry, Sarah, Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. Sarah's voice softened, but it wasn't without a trace of bitterness. It's not just about you being there, Andrew. It's about what we lost. It's about what I lost. And I can't change that. But I'm trying. I'm trying to make sure they don't go through the same things I did. The weight of her words settled over Andrew like a heavy blanket. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to fix this. He didn't know how to make up for all the lost time, all the things he should have done. How could he make up for a lifetime of absence? Sarah had been raising their children alone, doing everything on her own, and all he had done was live his life, oblivious to the fact that he had a family. His daughters, he had a family. And now, he had to find a way to be there for them. To be the father he should have been from the start. But how? How did he begin to make things right? He had so many questions, so many emotions swirling inside him. He wanted to be there for them, for the triplets, but he didn't even know where to start. How did you begin to parent children you had never known? How did you become the father you should have been years ago? The car rolled to a stop in front of a quiet restaurant. The evening had fallen, and the world outside felt distant, as though it was moving on without him. Andrew sat in the car, his mind reeling. "We're here," he said quietly, his voice low, as if he had to say something to break the suffocating silence. Sarah looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. She nodded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. Andrew didn't know what came next, but one thing was for sure, he had to try. For Sarah. For the triplets. For himself. The quiet hum of the car's engine filled the space between Andrew and Sarah as they sat outside the restaurant, the triplets already inside, their little faces now framed by the restaurant's large windows. The evening was drawing to a close, but the weight of the past few hours hung heavily in the air. Andrew stared ahead, unsure of what to do next. The conversation, the revelations, everything, he had barely processed it all. But there was one thing he knew for certain. He couldn't let them go. He couldn't walk away. Not after everything that had been revealed, not when he now knew the truth about his children. He wasn't sure how, but he was going to do whatever it took to make things right. "Sarah," he finally said, breaking the silence, his voice firm but filled with uncertainty. "I want to help. I want to help you, and the girls. I can't just sit back and do nothing." Sarah turned to him, her eyes narrowed slightly, as if unsure of where this was headed. "Help?" she asked, her tone cautious, wary. "What do you mean by that, Andrew?" Andrew's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew he couldn't back down now. "I want to help you all get back on your feet. I'm going to buy you a house. A safe place where you and the girls can live, where you don't have to worry about what comes next. I'll cover your expenses, take care of everything. You won't have to struggle anymore." There was a long pause as Sarah processed his words. Andrew could see the skepticism in her eyes, and he understood why. She had every right to question his motives. After all, it wasn't as if they had parted on good terms. And now, out of nowhere, he was offering to change everything for her. "Andrew, I don't know if I can accept that," Sarah finally said, her voice hesitant, a touch of fear creeping in. "I mean, it's generous, but it feels like too much. Why are you doing this?" Andrew's eyes softened. He had to be honest with her, as much as it scared him to admit it. "I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, Sarah. You've been through so much, and I've been blind to it all. I wasn't there when you needed me. I wasn't there when you were raising our children. I can't change the past, but I can change what happens next. I want to be a part of their lives. I want to be a part of yours." Sarah's eyes flickered with something, emotion maybe. But she quickly masked it, her expression hardening. "But you've already done so much, Andrew. What's your angle here?" Andrew sighed, leaning back in his seat. "There's no angle. I just want to make up for my mistakes. I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want you and the girls to have a chance at a better life. I want to be there for you, Sarah. For them." Sarah was silent for a long time, staring out of the window, lost in thought. Andrew didn't know what was going on in her mind, but he knew this was hard for her. She was used to doing everything on her own, never asking for help. And the thought of accepting something, especially from him, was probably more than she could handle. "It's just, I don't want you to think you can control my life, Andrew," Sarah said quietly, her voice almost fragile. "I've made it this far on my own. I've kept us alive. I've done what I had to do to survive, and I don't want to feel like I owe you anything. I don't want you to try and take over." Andrew's heart ached at her words. He understood her fear. She had been alone for so long, and now here he was, offering to step in and take control, even if that wasn't his intention. She had learned to rely on herself, to be independent in a world that didn't show mercy. The thought of giving up that control, even for something better, must have been terrifying. "I'm not trying to take over your life," Andrew said gently, his voice sincere. "I don't want to control anything. I just want to make sure you don't have to do this alone anymore. You and the girls deserve better than what life has handed you so far. I want to be there for you, not to take over, but to support you, however you need it." Sarah remained silent for a long time, her fingers gently tapping against the edge of the seat. Andrew didn't push her, didn't ask her to make a decision right then and there. He knew it would take time. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, not after everything that had happened. Finally, Sarah turned to him, her expression softening just a fraction. "I don't know, Andrew. I'm scared. I'm scared to trust you again." Andrew nodded. He knew that was part of the process. Rebuilding trust, especially after years of abandonment, wasn't something that could happen instantly. But he was willing to be patient. He was willing to prove that he could be the person Sarah and the girls needed him to be. "I understand," Andrew said, his voice steady. "But I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that I can be there for you. For the girls." Sarah hesitated, her eyes flicking back to the triplets in the restaurant. They were sitting at a table, playing with their food, oblivious to the heavy conversation taking place just outside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah let out a long breath. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll accept your help, but on one condition." Andrew raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" "You stay out of our lives, Andrew," Sarah said, her voice firm now, though there was a trace of vulnerability hidden beneath the surface. "I need to be the one who takes care of the girls. I need to be the one to raise them. You can help us. You can support us. But I'm not going to let you take control." Andrew nodded slowly, understanding her boundaries. He could respect that. In fact, he respected her more than ever in that moment. She was strong, stronger than he had given her credit for. She had been holding everything together for so long, and now, when help was finally offered, she wasn't just going to hand it all over. "I'll respect that," Andrew promised, his voice quiet but sincere. "I'm not here to take over. I just want to help however I can." Sarah gave him a long look, as if searching for any signs of deceit, but all she saw was the truth in his eyes. Finally, she sighed and nodded. "All right, Andrew. I'll take the help, but no strings attached. We do this on our terms." Andrew smiled, relief flooding him. "On your terms. I can live with that." The weight between them seemed to lighten, just a little. For the first time in what felt like forever, Andrew felt like maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. Maybe this was the chance he had been waiting for, to make things right, to build something with Sarah and the triplets. As they sat there in silence, the car parked outside the restaurant, Andrew realized something he hadn't in a long time. He had a second chance, a chance to be the man he should have been all along. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it. The weeks following Andrew's offer of help passed in a blur of uncertainty and cautious hope. He threw himself into his new role with determination, but no matter how hard he tried, the path forward wasn't as simple as he had imagined. There was no quick fix for the years of absence, and no amount of wealth or gestures could make up for the time he had lost. He tried. He really did. Andrew took the triplets out on little adventures, an afternoon at the park, a trip to the zoo, even a day at an amusement park. He wanted to bond with them, to show them that he was here, that he cared. He wanted them to see him not just as the stranger who showed up with an offer to change their lives, but as their father. But every time he reached out, every time he tried to break through their walls, there was hesitation, wariness in their eyes. The triplets, Ari, Lila, and Nia, were kind to him. They didn't push him away, but they didn't embrace him either. They watched him with those big eyes, so full of questions, so full of confusion. Ari, the oldest, had a solemn expression on her face at all times, while Lila and Nia clung to each other more tightly than they ever had before. They were a unit, a trio of innocence that had been shaken by a world they hadn't fully understood yet. And now, in front of them, was their father, the man they had never known, and it was clear that they didn't know how to fit him into their world. Andrew tried not to take it personally. He knew it wasn't about him. It was about them, about their sense of security that had been ripped apart. He tried to push through their wariness with patience. But the more time they spent together, the more the gap between them grew, and Andrew felt that sharp sting of rejection every time the triplets turned away from him. Every time they avoided making eye contact or shyly backed away from his touch. The days felt long. He would plan these outings, these attempts at connection, only to watch them unfold in silence. There was no spark, no instant bond, no miracle moment. He knew it wouldn't be easy. But somewhere in the pit of his stomach, the anxiety of it all was starting to gnaw at him. "Maybe I'm doing something wrong," Andrew muttered to himself one evening as he sat on the edge of the couch in the living room, the flickering light from the TV casting long shadows across the room. Sarah, who had been sitting nearby, looked up from her phone. Her face was etched with concern. "You're not doing anything wrong," she said quietly, though her voice was laced with uncertainty. She was grateful for Andrew's help, but she had been careful to keep her distance. She wasn't entirely sure what Andrew's presence in their lives would mean for her, for them, and her walls remained as solid as ever. "I just want them to know me," Andrew continued, his voice heavy with frustration. "I want to show them that I'm here for them, that I'm their father. But it's like they don't want me there." Sarah let out a small sigh, setting her phone down on the coffee table. She looked at Andrew, but there was a quiet sadness in her gaze. "They're confused, Andrew. They've been through a lot. And you've been absent. It's not going to change overnight." Andrew stared at her, his heart heavy. He knew she was right, but the weight of it was crushing. He wanted to be there for them, to be the father they needed. But he didn't know how to break through the barriers they had built, how to earn their trust when all they had known was the absence of their father. I know, but it's hard, Sarah. I see them struggling, and I want to help them. I want them to see me as their dad. But how do I do that when they barely even look at me? Sarah's expression softened slightly, but there was still a guardedness in her eyes. It takes time, Andrew. They don't know you. They don't know how to trust you, and neither do I, not yet. Andrew nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He understood. He had been absent. For years, he had been absent from their lives, from the lives of his children, and now he was paying the price for that. But he wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. I want to be a father to them, he said softly, as though speaking to himself more than to Sarah. I want to be here. I want to show them that I'm not going anywhere. But Sarah was already standing, her gaze moving to the kitchen. There was something else behind her eyes, something she wasn't saying, something she wasn't ready to confront. I'm sure you do, she said quietly. But you have to understand that you're not just stepping into their lives. You're stepping into mine too. Andrew watched as she moved toward the kitchen, the words hanging in the air between them. He wasn't sure if she was talking about the triplets or about their past, about everything that had been left unresolved between them. She was grateful for his help, but there were still walls. Walls she wasn't ready to let down. Not yet. As the weeks passed, the distance between Andrew and the triplets began to shrink, though the progress was slow, imperceptible at times. He could see the shift in their eyes, the cautious glances slowly transforming into something else, something that might have been acceptance. But even as small strides were made, there was always a barrier, a wall that still stood between them. The triplets, Ari, Lila, and Nia, remained distant, their walls still standing tall. But there was one exception, one small flicker of hope that Andrew had been waiting for, Leah. Leah, the youngest of the triplets, had always been the quiet one. She was reserved, hiding behind her sisters for protection, as though the world had been too much for her to handle. But Andrew had noticed something in her. She was different, softer in her gaze when she looked at him, more willing to be near him. She was the one who would hold his hand on their outings, the one who would sit beside him in the evenings, her tiny fingers brushing against his as if seeking reassurance. Andrew had never been a father before. He had no idea what he was doing. But with Leah, he found himself drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't as cautious as Ari, who would only look at him with suspicion, or Lila, who clung to her sisters for comfort. Leah seemed to sense something in him, a flicker of kindness, a warmth she hadn't experienced from him until now. And Andrew found himself doing whatever he could to make her feel safe, to show her that he wasn't going anywhere. There was a day not long after when Andrew took the triplets to the park. Ari and Lila stayed in the background, preferring to watch from a distance as the other children played. But Leah ran up to him, her small face lighting up with excitement as she grabbed his hand. "Can you push me on the swing, Daddy?" she asked shyly, her voice small but hopeful. The word Daddy hit Andrew like a freight train, a rush of warmth flooding his chest. He hesitated for a moment, not sure if he should correct her or just enjoy the moment. But then he saw the trust in her eyes, the longing for connection, and he couldn't bring himself to say anything that might break it. "Of course," he said, his voice soft. "Let's go." For the first time, Andrew pushed Leah on the swing, watching her giggle with joy as she soared higher and higher. Her laughter filled the air, and for a brief moment the pain, the confusion, the distance, everything faded. It was just him and Leah, and for the first time in his life, Andrew felt what it was like to be a father. As the days turned into weeks, Andrew's relationship with Leah began to evolve. She would come to him more often, sit beside him on the couch while he worked, or ask him questions about the world around her. Her small, quiet moments of connection were building a bridge between them, and Andrew could feel it, could see it in her eyes. Slowly, tentatively, he was becoming the father he had always hoped he could be. But while Andrew's bond with Leah grew stronger, his relationship with the other triplets remained fragile, a delicate dance of trying to connect without forcing it. Ari, the eldest, remained distant, as if unsure of what to make of the man who suddenly claimed to be her father. She watched him from afar, her gaze sharp and calculating, always sizing him up. Lila, though slightly warmer, still clung to her sisters for comfort, unwilling to fully open up to him. It was a slow process, one that made Andrew question if he was doing enough, if he was truly earning their trust. But every small step, every small victory with Leah kept him going. He didn't know how long it would take for the others to open up, but he couldn't let the fear of rejection stop him from trying. And then there was Sarah. Over time, Sarah had begun to see something in Andrew. It wasn't instant. She wasn't the type to forgive easily, to let go of the past that had hurt her so deeply. But she couldn't deny the change in Andrew. The way he showed up for the triplets, the way he wanted to be involved, even when they made it clear that they didn't need him. She began to see his commitment to them as more than just a responsibility. He was trying. He was trying for them, for her. There were moments when Sarah would sit next to Andrew on the couch, the two of them watching the triplets play in the other room. Sarah's guard was still high, but there was a softness in her eyes now, a willingness to let him in, to let him help. It wasn't easy for her to admit, but she had to acknowledge that Andrew's presence was making a difference in their lives. The triplets were safe. They were loved, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. "You're doing good, Andrew," Sarah said one evening as she sat beside him, watching him with the triplets in the background. "I see it. I see how much you care." Andrew glanced at her, his chest tightening. He had spent so many years trying to build an empire, trying to prove something to the world. But now, sitting here with Sarah, with the triplets, he realized that nothing he had built could compare to this. This feeling of being needed, of being a father. It was something he hadn't known he wanted, but now that it was right in front of him, he couldn't imagine life without it. "I'm just trying to make up for lost time," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of regret and determination. "For everything I missed, for everything I failed to do." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening. "I know, and I appreciate it. I see how much you're trying. But there's still so much to work through. You can't just fix everything with a check or a house. It's about time. It's about trust." Andrew nodded slowly. He knew she was right. He couldn't just buy his way into their lives. The love he wanted to give, the father he wanted to be, it had to be earned, over time, through patience and understanding. But he was willing to do whatever it took. The emotional conflict inside Andrew deepened with each passing day. He had grown to love the triplets, to care for them in a way he never thought possible. But at the same time, he was constantly questioning where he fit in their lives. He wanted to be a father, but how did he do that when Sarah was still holding on to the past, when she still carried the weight of everything they had been through? He wanted to be involved, but he didn't want to overstep, to push her away. And then there was the other side, the part of him that wanted to provide, that wanted to give them everything. He could offer them a life of luxury, a future free from the struggles Sarah had faced on her own. But did they want that? Did they want him to give them that life, or did they just want him to be their father, in the simplest, truest sense? Andrew didn't have all the answers, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. But what he did know was this: he was there. He was present. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Andrew had always prided himself on being a man of action, a man who could solve problems with a single move, a single decision. But nothing in his life had ever required the patience, the understanding, or the emotional resilience that parenting did. He had underestimated the complexity of his new role, the quiet moments, the small steps, the slow, often frustrating progress. He had expected the triplets to accept him with open arms, to fill the void he'd left behind with love and trust. But nothing about rebuilding relationships was that simple. Hello! If you have watched this far, let us play a little game. Comment what you ate for breakfast today, and also hit the subscribe button right away. One afternoon, Andrew took the triplets to the park. The sun was shining, the breeze was warm, and for a brief moment, it felt like the perfect opportunity to bond. It was a day meant for fun, for laughter, for breaking down barriers. But what started as a simple outing soon turned into something more complicated. Andrew had been trying to connect with Ari, the oldest of the triplets, for weeks now. She was the hardest to reach, the most distant, the one who wore her skepticism like armor. She had her guard up, and no matter how many times Andrew reached out, she kept pulling away. But today, he thought, today would be different. He had a plan, a small gesture, something to show her that he cared. He would push her gently, encourage her to join in with the others, make her feel like part of the family. "Ari, why don't you come try the swing with me?" Andrew called out with a warm smile, trying to keep his tone light, casual. But Ari didn't look at him. She continued to kick the dirt, her eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding his gaze. She was stubborn, as always, unwilling to be coaxed into something she didn't want to do. "I don't want to," she muttered, her voice sharp, laced with irritation. Andrew felt the frustration rising inside him. He had been trying so hard, and still she pushed him away. This wasn't how he'd imagined it. This wasn't how he'd thought things would go. He had worked so hard to earn their trust, to show them he was here, that he wanted to be a part of their lives. But Ari wasn't having it. And now, in this moment, he felt like a failure. "Come on, Ari," he insisted, his voice a little more forceful now. "You never know, you might actually enjoy it." Ari's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger. She glared at him for a moment before standing up and taking a few steps back, away from the swing set. "I don't need you to tell me what to do," she spat, her words sharp as a knife. "I don't want to be here with you. I don't want your help." Andrew froze. The words hit him harder than he had anticipated. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a declaration, a statement that cut through all the progress he had made. Ari's anger wasn't just about the swing, it was about him, about his presence in her life, and about everything he had missed. She wasn't ready to forgive him, and in that moment, he realized that he might never fully understand the depth of her pain. "Ari, I'm just trying to help," Andrew said, his voice faltering slightly as he tried to calm the situation. But his words only seemed to fuel her anger. "You don't get it," Ari yelled, her voice cracking with emotion. "You can't just come back into our lives like nothing happened. You're not my dad. You don't get to tell me what to do." The words stung more than he expected. He had always known it would be hard, but hearing those words from her, from his own daughter, made the reality of his absence hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just a stranger to her. He was a reminder of everything she had lost, of everything she had to endure without him. The tension in the air was thick, and the triplets, who had been playing nearby, stopped in their tracks. Lila and Nia, who had been quieter than usual, exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. Andrew stood there, his hands at his sides, unsure of how to fix this. How could he explain? How could he make them understand that he wasn't trying to take over, wasn't trying to replace anyone? Ari, her eyes filled with tears, turned away and stormed off, disappearing into the trees, leaving Andrew standing there, his heart sinking. He stood still for a moment, the weight of her rejection pressing down on him. He had tried so hard, and yet, it wasn't enough. "I messed up," Andrew whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. He wanted to go after Ari to make things right, but he knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't a simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a few kind words. No, this was deep, deep hurt. The scars of years without a father, years without him, were too deep to erase with a single gesture. Back at home, the house was quieter than usual. The triplets had retreated to their rooms, and Andrew sat alone in the living room, replaying the incident over and over in his mind. What had he done wrong? Was it that he pushed too hard? Or was it something deeper, something he couldn't fix in a single day? Sarah entered the room, her eyes scanning him for any sign of what had happened. She had seen the frustration on his face when he came back inside, but she hadn't asked. She already knew. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice careful. Andrew sighed, running his hand through his hair. "It didn't go well," he admitted. "I pushed her too much. I thought I could get through to her, but I just made it worse. She's still angry. I don't know how to fix it." Sarah sat down beside him, her expression softening. "You can't force it, Andrew," she said gently. "Ari's been through a lot. She doesn't trust easily, and that's going to take time. You can't fix everything in one day." Andrew nodded, though it didn't make him feel better. He had hoped that his actions, his efforts, would lead to something more immediate. But now he understood, this wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't going to be fixed with grand gestures or promises. It was going to take time, and more than that, it was going to take patience. That night, as the house grew quieter and the children settled into bed, Andrew sat alone in the living room, lost in thought. He had always been a man of action, but he was learning, painfully, that there were things that couldn't be fixed with actions alone. Trust, love, connection, they took time, they took vulnerability. And maybe, for the first time, Andrew was starting to understand that. He wasn't going to give up. No, he couldn't. But he needed to change. He needed to be patient with them, and with himself. He had made a mistake, and while it had cost him in the short term, he realized it was also a lesson. A painful lesson, but one he needed to learn. The road to healing was never straight, Andrew thought as he sat there, staring into the dim light of the living room. It was filled with setbacks, with mistakes and misunderstandings. But what mattered was that he kept trying. And he would. For them. For his family. The evening air was cool as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the house, the sounds of the triplets' laughter echoed from the hallway, their voices spilling into the quiet living room. The day had been relatively peaceful. The girls had enjoyed their afternoon, each in their own way, and Andrew had made another attempt to connect with them. Slowly, ever so slowly, they were beginning to warm up to him. But despite the progress, there was still a distance, one that Andrew knew he would have to work through every single day. Hello! If you have watched this far, comment the first word that comes to your mind, and also hit the subscribe button right away. Sarah, as usual, had been nearby, her presence always just on the edge of his peripheral vision, watching over the triplets with a mother's instinct. She had softened over the weeks, a small part of her that had been closed off slowly cracking open. But even now, Andrew could see the subtle barriers she had put up. She wasn't fully there yet. Not with him, not with their shared past. Tonight, however, there was a shift. The house had settled into a quiet rhythm, the triplets tucked away in bed, their soft breathing a reminder of the peace Andrew had longed to bring into their lives. Sarah had taken a seat on the couch, a rare moment when she wasn't busy with something, checking on the girls, managing the house, or sorting through the day's events. Andrew hesitated for a moment, standing by the window, looking out at the darkening world beyond. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to her tonight, but something told him it was time. It was time to have the conversation they both needed to have, the one they had avoided for so long. "How's everything going?" Andrew asked, turning away from the window, his voice casual, but with a layer of vulnerability that he hadn't fully realized until now. Sarah, who had been lost in thought, looked up at him, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. There was a fleeting moment of silence before she responded, her voice quieter than usual. "It's been a lot, but we're getting by. The girls are adjusting slowly. It's not easy." Andrew moved to the couch, sitting down beside her. There was a space between them, both physical and emotional, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel the distance quite as sharply. "I know it's not easy," Andrew said softly, his voice filled with the weight of everything they had both been through. "It's been hard on all of us, hasn't it? I didn't know what to expect, and I'm not sure I'm doing all the right things, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you, for the girls, for all of us." Sarah didn't answer right away. She sat back slightly, her hands resting on her lap as she considered his words. Andrew could see the years of pain and struggle reflected in her face, but there was something else too, something that had softened over time, something she wasn't quite ready to admit yet. "You've been here, Andrew," Sarah said, her voice tinged with both gratitude and hesitation. "But it's not just about being here. It's about showing up in the right way. You can't just walk into our lives and think everything will fall into place. You can't buy your way into their hearts. You can't buy your way into mine." Andrew nodded, the weight of her words hitting him harder than he expected. She was right. He had spent so much time thinking that his actions, his gestures, could solve everything. But he realized, as he sat there beside her, that it wasn't about the money, the house, or the grand plans. It was about presence. It was about time. It was about the emotional work he had to do, not just for the girls, but for Sarah too. "I know," Andrew said quietly, his voice thick with sincerity. "I know I can't fix everything in one fell swoop. I know it's going to take time. I'm not trying to buy my way in. I don't know what else to do sometimes. I'm scared I'll fail you. Fail them. I've already missed so much." There was the raw honesty, the part of him that had been buried under layers of pride and fear. Sarah had seen it before, but this time it felt different. This time, there was no wall between them. Sarah let out a breath, her gaze softening as she turned to face him more fully. "You've missed a lot, Andrew. We both have. But we're here now, and that has to mean something. We can't change the past, but we can move forward. Together." The words hung in the air for a moment, the weight of them both heavy and freeing. Andrew didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to understand fully. They could move forward. Together. It wasn't too late. And even though it would be a long road, it was a road they could walk down side by side. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Andrew said, his voice low, his heart heavy with the years of regret. "I've hurt you. I've let you down. I wasn't there when you needed me. I wasn't there when we needed each other. But I want to make it right. I want to show you that I'm committed, not just to the girls, but to you. I want us to build something we never had." Sarah's eyes flickered, a mixture of vulnerability and caution. She had been hurt too many times to trust easily. But Andrew saw something in her eyes, a glimmer of the woman he had once known, the woman he had fallen in love with. It was there, buried under years of pain, and in that moment, he realized how much he had taken her strength for granted. She had done it all alone for so long. She had carried this burden by herself. But now, she didn't have to anymore. And neither did he. "I'm still angry at you, Andrew," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm still hurt. You have no idea how hard it's been. Raising the girls on my own, going through everything. But," she paused, taking a breath, her gaze lingering on him as she searched his face for something. "But I see you trying. And I see you with the girls. And that matters." Andrew felt his chest tighten, his heart swelling with the weight of her words. He had spent so many years thinking he had to prove something, thinking he had to be perfect to make up for his mistakes. But now here they were, both flawed, both broken in their own ways, but still willing to try. "I won't give up, Sarah," Andrew said, his voice filled with the conviction he hadn't known he had. "I know I can't fix everything, but I'll be here. Every day. For you, for them. I'll show you I'm serious about this." Sarah nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Outside, the night had fully fallen, and the house was quiet, save for the soft hum of life within. The triplets were asleep, their soft breaths filling the air, and for the first time in a long time, Andrew felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. "Hello! If you have watched this far, let us play a little game. Comment the first thing you see around you, and also hit the subscribe button right away." They had a long way to go, but in this quiet moment, Andrew realized that they were on the right path. They were starting to rebuild, piece by piece, and with every conversation like this one, with every small step, they were forging a new beginning. Together. It had been weeks since Andrew had made the decision to step into the role of a father, to show up in the lives of his children, his daughters. The days were filled with small moments of connection, with attempts to bridge the gap that had been formed by years of absence. But as much as he worked to build relationships with the triplets, as much as he tried to prove his sincerity, there was still a lingering tension in the air, a weight that hadn't been lifted. And that weight, Andrew realized, wasn't just on the triplets. It was on Sarah too. It was late one evening, after the girls had gone to bed, that the air between him and Sarah finally cracked. They were sitting in the living room, as they often did now, a quiet space where they could talk, sometimes about the triplets, sometimes about nothing at all. But tonight, there was something different in the air, something that Andrew couldn't ignore. Sarah sat on the couch, her eyes focused on her hands, nervously picking at her nails. She was more withdrawn than usual, quieter, her mind clearly somewhere else. Andrew had been watching her for some time, his concern growing. He knew that behind her guarded exterior, something was weighing heavily on her heart. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel it. He had learned by now not to push, not to try to rush her into talking. But tonight, something made him speak. Maybe it was the weight of his own feelings, or maybe it was the realization that Sarah needed him, not just as a father to the girls, but as the man who had failed her for so long. "Sarah, you've been so quiet lately," Andrew said, his voice gentle, trying to break through the silence. "Is everything okay?" For a moment, Sarah didn't respond. She just sat there, her shoulders slumped, her eyes still focused on her hands. Andrew's chest tightened. He could see that something was wrong, but he wasn't sure how to help, how to reach her. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just tired, Andrew. I've been carrying so much for so long, and I don't know how much more I can handle." The words hit Andrew like a punch to the gut. She had been carrying the burden of raising their children, of building a life without him, and all the while, he had been too consumed by his own life to notice. He thought of all the times she must have felt alone, all the moments she had to face the world with no one to turn to. His heart ached as he realized just how deeply he had hurt her. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Andrew said, his voice breaking as he reached out to her. "I had no idea. I didn't know it was this hard for you. I wasn't there when you needed me most." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She kept them locked inside, just as she had for so many years. But the cracks in her armor were becoming impossible to ignore. She let out a shuddering breath, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to speak the words that had been buried so deep inside her for so long. "I tried so hard, Andrew," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "I tried to be strong. I tried to make sure the girls didn't feel the pain, the emptiness. But I couldn't do it alone. I couldn't be everything to them. And I couldn't let myself be weak. Not after everything." Andrew could see the rawness in her face, the weight of all the years of struggle, of fighting to keep everything together while he had been out of reach. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her, the constant pressure of being both mother and father, carrying the weight of everything on her shoulders. He felt ashamed of himself for not seeing it sooner. "I should have been there, Sarah. I should have been there for you," Andrew said, his voice full of regret. He leaned closer to her, his hand gently resting on hers. "I've spent so many years building my career, trying to make something of myself, and I ignored what really mattered. You, the girls, you were always more important than anything I've done. And I let you down." Tears finally welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, but the vulnerability in her expression was clear. "I don't know how to let you back in, Andrew. I don't know how to trust you after everything that's happened. I've been through so much, and now you're here, trying to make up for it all. But I can't just forget." Andrew felt his heart break for her. He could see how much she had suffered, how much she had carried for so long, and he knew that just saying sorry wouldn't be enough to heal the wounds he had caused. But he also knew that he had to try. He had to show her that he was committed, not just to the girls, but to her too. "I know I can't undo the past," Andrew said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I can't change what happened, but I can change what happens now. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. I'm here. And I'm not just here for the girls. I'm here for you. I want to be a part of your life again. I want to be the man you need me to be. But I can't do it without you. I need you to let me in." For a long time, Sarah didn't speak. She just sat there, her body tense, her mind obviously torn between the past and the future. But Andrew's words seemed to settle over her like a soft weight, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to listen, to really listen. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted quietly. "I'm scared that I'll trust you again, and you'll leave. I've been on my own for so long, I don't know how to let someone in. But I see you trying. I see how much you care. And I want to believe you. I want to believe that you're here for us." Andrew's heart swelled with emotion. He reached over, gently cupping her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. I promise. We're in this together now. We'll rebuild. We'll heal. But I need you to let me be a part of it. All of it. The good, the bad, the hard stuff. Let me help you. Let me be there for you." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply. She could feel the sincerity in his touch, in his words. She could feel that he meant it. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Not just for the triplets, not just for their future, but for herself too. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll try to trust you again, Andrew. But you have to know, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. But I'm willing to try. For them. For us." Andrew's heart skipped a beat, and he smiled softly, his chest tightening with emotion. "Thank you, Sarah. That's all I need. I'll be here, every step of the way. I'm in this for good." They sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air, but there was something else now, a shift. A new beginning, not just for Andrew and Sarah, but for the family they were becoming. The road ahead would be hard. There would be setbacks, more challenges, and more moments of doubt. But tonight, they had taken the first real step toward healing. Together. The quiet rhythm of daily life had begun to settle in for Andrew, Sarah, and the triplets. Days blurred together in a comforting, familiar routine. It hadn't been easy, and it certainly hadn't been without its bumps along the way, but somehow, after everything they'd been through, they had found their footing. They had found a way to move forward together. In the mornings, the house filled with the laughter of the triplets, their energy contagious as they rushed around to get ready for school. Andrew had finally begun to feel the sense of purpose he had been missing all these years. His heart swelled each time he saw one of the triplets look to him for reassurance, for comfort, for something only a father could provide. It wasn't perfect. Far from it. The triplets still had moments of hesitation, moments when the wounds of their past resurfaced. Ari was still the hardest to reach, the one who guarded her heart the most. But even Ari had started to soften, little by little. She'd begun to see him, not as a stranger, not as a man who had failed them in the past, but as a presence in their lives that she could count on. Lila and Nia were still more easily won over, their trust a little less fragile, though even they were learning what it meant to have a father. Andrew hadn't been perfect in their eyes, but he had given them something they had never had before: consistency, patience, and most of all, love. Sarah, too, had grown. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that first meeting with Andrew, bitter and wary of what he might bring. No, Sarah had allowed herself to trust again, slowly, hesitantly, but with a depth that meant more than any grand gesture. She had seen the way Andrew had stepped up, how he had put their family first, not just in actions but in spirit. She had seen him not only work through his mistakes but also embrace the responsibility that came with the role of being a father, not just to the triplets but to her as well. Their relationship wasn't perfect. The scars of their past would never disappear completely, but they had found a new understanding. There was still a distance between them at times, moments when the weight of their history would pull them apart, but there was also a shared hope, a shared commitment to rebuilding. One Saturday afternoon, as the fall winds began to pick up, Andrew and Sarah found themselves sitting on the porch of their new home, the one Andrew had bought for them, an old, charming house that had become a symbol of their new beginning. The triplets were outside playing in the yard, their laughter rising above the rustling of the leaves in the trees. Sarah sat beside him, her gaze following the triplets as they ran and tumbled in the grass. "It's quiet today," Andrew remarked, his voice tinged with something resembling peace. He leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on his knees. Sarah smiled softly, but there was something wistful in her eyes, a quiet contentment mixed with the weight of all they had overcome. "It's been a while since I've felt like this," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I didn't know if we'd ever get here, but somehow we did." Andrew nodded, his eyes focused on the triplets as they played. "I didn't know either," he admitted. "There were times when I wasn't sure if I could be the father they needed. But I'm here now, and I won't give up on them. On you." Sarah looked at him then, her gaze softening with the vulnerability she had slowly allowed herself to show. She reached over, resting her hand gently on his. "I know," she said. "I see you, Andrew. I see how much you care, and I see how hard you've tried. I see that you're here, not just for the girls, but for me too." Andrew squeezed her hand, his chest tightening with emotion. He hadn't expected any of this when he first came back into their lives. But now, sitting here with Sarah, watching the triplets play and laugh, he realized something he had been missing for so long. It wasn't the success, the career, or the wealth that mattered. It was this quiet, simple moment of connection, of shared hope for the future. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we're not done yet. I'm here for whatever comes next, Sarah. I'll be here for you. For the girls." Sarah smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere either." And for the first time in a long time, they both felt it. The weight of the past had loosened its grip, if only just a little. The future, uncertain as it was, felt more hopeful than it ever had before. The following week, Andrew woke up early one Saturday morning to find the house buzzing with activity. Sarah was in the kitchen, making breakfast, and the triplets were running around, as usual, their laughter filling the house. It had been a long time since the house felt like home, since it felt full, not just with noise, but with the warmth of family. And now, as he stood there watching them, he felt something deep inside him settle. He wasn't just a visitor in their lives anymore. He wasn't just the man who paid the bills or bought the house. He was their father, and they were his children. As he walked into the kitchen, Sarah glanced up from the stove, her face lighting up with a smile. Andrew couldn't help but smile back. There was still so much to work through, so much left to rebuild, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had made it this far, and they were going to keep moving forward. It was then, as Andrew sat down at the table, that the triplets ran into the room, their faces beaming with excitement. They each took turns hugging him, their small arms wrapping around his waist, their voices bubbling with energy. Ari, still the most reserved of the three, was the last to approach. She paused for a moment, then, as if on impulse, she reached out, wrapping her arms around him in a quick, tentative hug. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice still a bit hesitant, but filled with something new, something Andrew had been waiting for. The word hit Andrew like a wave. Dad. It was the first time any of them had called him that. The word felt so foreign, so powerful, that he almost couldn't process it at first. But when he looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with tears, he realized what it meant. It wasn't just a word. It was a promise. It was the moment everything had come full circle. "Dad," Ari repeated, her voice more certain this time. Andrew pulled her into a tight hug, feeling a mix of joy and relief wash over him. He looked at Sarah, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. They had done it. They had made it through the hardest parts. The journey wasn't over, but they had crossed the first major hurdle. And so, in that moment, everything came full circle. The family they had always dreamed of was finally starting to take shape. Not in the way they had imagined, not in the way they had hoped for, but in a new, imperfect, but beautiful way. The road ahead was still long, and they all knew that there would be struggles, moments of doubt, and setbacks. But as Andrew looked at Sarah, and then at the triplets, something inside him clicked. This was his family. They had their scars, their history, their mistakes, but they had each other. And that, he realized, was enough. If you've enjoyed this story and want to see more romantic twists and heartfelt moments, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the journey. Don't miss out on more tales that tug at your heartstrings. Subscribe now and never miss an update from our ever-growing family of story lovers. Until next time, stay tuned for the next beautiful story.